All right, we've made buttercream, and buttercream's just fine, but really what I love is salted caramel. It's really dangerous. For all of you pregnant ladies out there, it is the most dangerous because it hits both your sweet spot and your savory spot. So anyway, let's get started with salted caramel. My big rule with making caramel is that I don't stir it very much, and I'll explain why in just a moment. Also, I don't use candy thermometers or corn syrup, so let's get this going. You're gonna take some sugar here and place it in your pot, and then I like to add about a tablespoon of water. Here we go. And a teaspoon of lemon juice. And the lemon juice keeps the sugar from crystallizing too much. It's a little bit of acid, which is good. Let's turn this stove on here. And I'm going to swirl it about just once, and then I'm going to leave it alone. And the reason I leave it alone is because if you agitate your sugar a lot, if you move it around while it's melting, what happens is that you get a lot of cold sugar crystals on top and melted sugar on the bottom, and it melts really unevenly. So I really recommend taking your wooden spoon, and I prefer a wooden spoon to a silicone or even a metal spoon, and leaving it here so you don't get tempted to move it around too much, and let the sugar begin to liquefy on its own. Again, don't agitate it because air will get into the sugar and it'll cool it down instead of letting it melt. Every now and then take a peek at it, make sure that it's liquefying nicely, and by liquefying it means the sugar is turning into a liquid. Whenever I'm baking, I always think of sugar as a liquid ingredient because of this. When you apply heat to sugar, it liquefies and becomes a liquid. The opposite is true with eggs. When you add heat to an egg, it becomes a solid. So when you're baking, think of these things. It doesn't really have much to do with caramel, but it'll really help out when you're making cakes and such. So right now, I'm waiting for the sugar to liquefy. As soon as it liquefies, it will start turning brown. Caramelization happens after evaporation. And the easiest way to remember this is to think about onions. When you put onions in a hot pan, they very quickly steam up and then begin to caramelize. And the same is true with sugar, except there's a lot less water in sugar, so it happens really quickly. So here we go. We're starting to hear a little bit of action here. So while we're waiting for our sugar to liquefy, let's go take a look at our macarons and see if they're almost ready to bake. They are looking really good. When we first piped these, they were really shiny, and as they sat, they began to dry. And now when I touch them, nothing gets on my finger. They have a little crust on them. They don't look shiny anymore. They form a sort of a matte finish on them. So this would be a great time to turn the oven on. Take a look at the sugar right now. We haven't stirred it, which is really, really good. And now that it's starting to liquefy, I want you to think of your spoon as a tool to move the sugar so that it melts evenly. So you're not looking to really whip this up. You're going to gently coax the sugar so that the wet sugar moves off the hot spots and the dry sugar gets melted. Just like the chocolate, the sugar is going to melt itself. So just see how I'm slowly just moving it about. Here we are. And right now our caramel, or our melted sugar here, looks quite grainy. I'm going to wait till it looks a little bit more see-through before I add my cream. Now when you're making caramel, you need to think about the amount of fat you're adding. If you're making hard caramel candies, you'll use very little fat. If you're making a caramel sauce to go over ice cream, you want a lot of fat because you want it to be super fluid. We're going to spread a thin layer of this caramel between the two macarons, so we need just the right amount of fat. And the fat in this case comes from heavy cream and some good butter. We're going to flavor this with some sea salt. The salt we're using is from France. It's a good gray salt. The more color there is in the salt, the less processed it is, and the more oceany it tastes. So as soon as we add our heavy cream, we'll also be adding the salt. If you want to add a little bit of vanilla, you'll also add it right after the heavy cream. This is a good time to gently coax it again. So I'm going to wait till I get more color here in my caramel before I add the cream. And the cream's great because not only does it sort of give a softness and fluidity to our caramel, but it stops the caramelization of the sugar. So if you want that deep golden flavor, wait till it just gets to that state and then quickly add your heavy cream. And the heavy cream stops the caramelization and creates a more fluid caramel. And then we'll sort of give some more unctuous texture to our caramel by adding some butter. If you don't have sea salt at home, just add a little salted butter to your caramel. That'll take care of it. Do you see how we're starting to get some color on our caramel here? I want to wait till this looks a little bit darker and more see-through, because right now it still looks a bit grainy. All right, look at this beautiful caramel color we have here. I'm going to get this just a teensy bit darker. It smells really good. Okay, I've reached the color that I want in my caramel, and it's gorgeous, and it smells tiny bit burnt, which I love. And I'm going to dump in the heavy cream all at once. Isn't that beautiful? All right, and I'm going to add in a few pinches of this gorgeous sea salt. And I'm going to cook this down for just a few more seconds. I want this to be thicker. If you have a really thin pot, it'll happen very quickly. If you have a thicker pot, it might take a little bit longer. But you just want to notice that your caramel's thickened up quite a bit. And this is going to make your kitchen smell so good. If you happen to have an apple nearby, it's a really good vessel to taste this with. Be careful because it's really hot. All right, and now I'm ready to add my butter. I'm going to cut it into a couple little pieces. There we are. And now that my caramel has thickened up a bit, I'm going to add this butter. Once I've added the butter, I'm going to cook it down until it's the thickness that I want. The more you cook the caramel down, the more moisture evaporates and the thicker the caramel will be. There we are. You're also in less danger of burning this because there's more moisture in the pot. Look at that. You have just made caramel without corn syrup, without the need for a candy thermometer, just with a watchful eye and some good instincts. I'm going to add a little bit of vanilla to this while it's cooking down. Remember how we split the vanilla bean earlier? Just going to cut a little end off here, and then I like to split it horizontally like that. Nice and smooth. There we are. Open it up. And I'm going to hold my knife again at a 45-degree angle and gently press it along. You don't want to apply too much pressure because you'll pull up the fibers of the bean, which are a little bit bitter and don't have all the flavor that the seeds have. And I'm just going to put these seeds in here, and I'll take that half and stick it right in the pot. It doesn't matter how much or how little you use. It's all about adding just the right amount of flavor for your taste. All right, I want my caramel to thicken a little bit more because these are going into the macaron. And if it's super runny, it's just going to fall off the cookie. So I'm going to cook it down just a little bit more. And then my trick to cool this quickly is to pour it onto a cookie sheet. You can do this on a plate, on a cookie sheet, just a nice large surface so that the caramel can cool a bit faster. Don't put this directly into the refrigerator. If you get a really big shock of humidity or temperature difference, you'll find that the fat separates. You get like a layer of butter on top and then some harder caramel. So this is the fastest and safest way to chill your caramel. We are about 30 seconds to nirvana here. So this is how I test. See how runny this is? I want this to feel a little bit thicker than that. I can feel the caramel getting thicker. Do you see how I move my spoon around and you can see the bottom? It kind of stays apart. My caramel's gotten a bit thicker. It's coating the spoon a lot more. So our caramel is nice and thick and it's bubbling up. It's coating the spoon and dripping more slowly in a thicker sort of pattern. Watch that. And it'll thicken pretty dramatically as it cools. So don't worry if it still looks a little bit runny. As it cools, it'll get a lot thicker. I'm going to pour this right here onto the cookie sheet, kind of spread it everywhere. Oh my God, it's so good. There we are. Keep the vanilla bean in there to keep flavoring it up. And if you feel like you got some little sugar crystals in there, just strain this through a strainer or just kind of pour it carefully so you don't get those sugar crystals, but it's not the end of the world. As much as you want to taste this right now, I would recommend waiting about 10 minutes because it's really, really hot. So let this cool and hang out for a little bit and then, grab a spoon and start eating it, or grab a piece of apple or a pear or a piece of chocolate. Whatever you need to taste this, it's really, really delicious.